Dragon Ball fans, you'll quickly learn that each one has their own threshold for pain in terms of what they can deal with from the series. Some might point to GT as the greatest source of anguish, and understandably so. And some might point to something like the Great Saiyaman arc, in which Gohan goes to high school. Ugh. But for me, one of the hardest things to sit through in the Dragon Ball franchise is Dragon Ball Z, Fusion Reborn. I don't think I really need to go into a history lesson of Akira Toriyama's classic series, as most people probably already know the plot, as well as the history behind it. Not to mention it would take a whole video to break down the series itself, so I'll just jump right into this movie. Fusion Reborn is basically a non-canonical project released by Toei somewhere in between the Saiyaman and Buu arc. It's interesting to note that this movie was released about 5 months before the manga chapter that featured Vegito came out. The basic plot is that a young demon neglects his duties in changing out some kind of machine that harnesses evil essence. Because I guess he's too busy being a cliched portrait of 90s teenagers, with their Walkmans and shit. The machine explodes, turning the teenager into Janemba, which is what I imagine the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man would look like if he were drawn by Matt Groening after a few Jaeger bombs and bong hits. Meanwhile, Goku and Pikkon, who are both fighting in the Otherworld tournament, are sent by the Kais to investigate. Of course, they find Mr. Jaundice Puff wreaking havoc on the balance between the living world and that of the dead, unleashing all manner of evil upon the earth. Of course, Goku is no match for the monster on his own, but not all is lost, as Vegeta arrives on the battlefield, and it's up to our two heroes to team up to defeat the monster and restore the balance between worlds. Where have I seen this plot before? A completely avoidable evil is released onto the Earth, causing unbelievable chaos. The villain is a sadistic fat child creature that looks like Roseanne Barr dipped in candy coating, and eventually transforms into a completely unstoppable badass. Oh yeah, the Buu Saga. Don't get me wrong, the Buu Saga is certainly not the worst time for Dragon Ball Z, but to me it's easily one of the weaker sagas in the series. Buu is extremely annoying as a character, but at least there are some complexities to his story that you can sink your teeth into. And even the worst aspect of DBZ, in my opinion, the Saiyaman arc, while incredibly stupid, does have some character building for Gohan, even if it does make him completely insufferable. So imagine taking some of the worst aspects of Majin Buu, the turning people into chocolate, the childlike oafishness, the incomprehensible speech that sounds like Elmo with a lobotomy, and tweak it slightly. Then turn it up to 11, and that is Janemba. I get the same feeling watching this movie as I did when I watched both of those arcs. That same sense of, why the hell am I still watching this? But while I could sit through Great Saiyaman speeches or Boo's childishness, this movie just feels like a chore. And I believe a big part of that is because there are scenes in this movie that constantly remind me that I'm watching a cartoon. Let me explain. I don't really consider most anime to be what is traditionally thought of as a cartoon. I consider it animation for the most part, which is something wholly different, as a cartoon typically denotes something very outlandish and childish in nature. And for me, DBZ has always kind of straddled the fence. Toriyama always employed a great balance in both Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z of having immature humor, but at the same time very stark and serious moments. And as Dragon Ball progressed into Dragon Ball Z, it evolved into a much more serious work, which is why something like this is just off-putting. Goku grew up, he got married, father to son, and while his childlike zeal for life never went away, he became a man, and most of Dragon Ball Z reflects that, which is why it's a shame it devolved back down into such a childish mess with some of the later DBZ plotlines. But at least in the Boo and Saiyaman arcs, there seemed to be enough seriousness for me to latch onto. But with this, I just don't see it. But perhaps the biggest issue I have with this movie is the fact that Janemba just isn't a very strong or interesting character. I mean, compare him to all the other movie villains, and he comes up pretty lackluster. You have Broly, who's essentially just a genetically superior Saiyan who wants to destroy everything. You have Cooler, who just wants to challenge the man who killed his brother. You have Super Android 13, who's a leftover experiment from Dr. Gero, who apparently was programmed as a trucker. Hell, even Garlic Jr. has a better backstory than Janemba. What's Janemba's story? He's an accident. What's his biggest weakness? Insults. I shit you not. That's right, folks. The character that essentially convinced the Prince of all Saiyans to do a fusion dance with Kakarot has the same weakness as an insecure 5-year-old child. It's actually kind of sad, because they had a lot of potential here. I mean, maybe not with Janemba, but with the fact that a lot of the villains of DBZ past are released onto Earth. But of course they have to piss that away by having Frieza get downed in one punch, and oh my god, that's Hitler. Somehow, when I think of evil being released into the Dragon Ball Z universe, I just don't imagine Hitler and a group of Hetzers firing crayon-colored shells at Trunks and Goten. I don't know. I mean, maybe I just wasn't paying enough attention in those 291 episodes of Dragon Ball Z to spot Hitler and his Wehrmacht making a cameo.
We're going to be doing one thing, and one thing only. Killing Nazis.
You don't think you could have let Frieza train or something? I mean, come on. Why even bring these guys out of hell if they're just going to puss out, and the main enemy our heroes on Earth are going to face are cute zombies and a 4-kids version of Hitler? I'm sorry, I just can't get over that. Hitler is in a DBZ movie. I'm not even really offended or anything, just why? I mean, continuity-wise, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, yeah, the story does take place on Earth, but why have we never seen any signs of our history until now? Is this supposed to be an alternate version of the Earth, or a future version? And none of the other characters are really historical figures. I mean, most of them are fictional. You have Count Chocula and the DBZ villains, but then it's just like, bam! Here's some samurai, and then here's Hitler. I think my sense of bewilderment at this scene really sums up my feelings on this movie altogether. It's just so random and has so many head-scratching moments. Like the director and the animators just forgot to take their Adderall during production. The plot is basically a rehash of something we've seen out of the series. The villain is anything but complex or interesting, and the action is decent at best, but definitely can't make up for all the other elements of what the fuckery. Overall, I would call this one of, if not the weakest, of the Dragon Ball Z movies. And yes, that does include Bio Broly. A lot of people will complain about the fact that this is non-canonical, but honestly, that's not what really bothers me about this movie. And I'm not one of those dragon snobs who just thinks that anything Toriyama doesn't have influence over is complete crap. Case in point,
Dragon Ball Evolution.
Executive producer Akira Toriyama. I rest my case. In my opinion, this movie just doesn't add enough to the DBZ experience for me. And as so, it kind of feels like someone trying to imitate Toriyama's touch more than it really feels like them trying to put a different spin on the mythos or add a new story. That's my review of Dragon Ball Z Fusion Reborn. Neighborhood Friendly Ranter, signing out.